They say the hardest things to see are the ones right in front of you. I used to scoff at that idea, thinking I was the exception, the kind of husband who paid attention, who really knew his wife inside and out. Turns out, I was dead wrong. My name is Mike, and if you had asked me a year ago, I would have told you that I had the perfect life. I met Emily during our senior year at college. It was one of those cliché meet-cuties you see in movies. I was at a friend's party, distracted, not paying attention to where I was walking, when I bumped into her. Literally, I knocked her drink right out of her hand. I was mortified, but Emily just laughed, brushing off the accident like it was nothing. We talked for hours after that, and by the end of the night, I knew she was the one. Fast forward a year, and we were married. Not long after, we had our son, Ethan. Our life felt like something out of a storybook. Happy, steady, uncomplicated. I'd started my own tech company, which took off faster than I'd ever imagined. Emily, who had always been the creative one, decided to pause her career in marketing to stay home with Ethan for a few years. We were partners in every sense of the word. At least, that's what I thought. A few years later, when Ethan started school, Emily decided it was time to return to the workforce. I was all for it. She'd been talking about getting back into marketing for a while, and I knew how much she missed the excitement of it. She landed a job at a law firm, working as the marketing manager for one of the most prestigious firms in the city. I couldn't have been prouder. We celebrated over dinner that night, both of us excited for this new chapter. In those first few months, everything seemed great. Emily was happy, Ethan was thriving in school, and my business was booming. We were living the dream. But dreams have a nasty way of turning into nightmares, don't they? It started with the little things. Emily working late more often than usual, the occasional weekend meeting that seemed to come out of nowhere, the work trips that had become more frequent. I didn't think much of it at first. She was doing well at her job. After all, I figured her boss, Daniel, was just demanding. Emily spoke highly of him, though I couldn't say I ever liked the guy. He was older, successful, polished, the kind of guy who exuded power in every room he walked into. Emily respected him, and I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? She was my wife. We'd built a life together, shared dreams, raised a son. Trust wasn't something I ever questioned. But then the doubt started creeping in. It wasn't one thing. It was a series of small, barely noticeable changes. Emily stopped texting me during the day like she used to. Our conversations at dinner grew shorter, filled with long silences where there used to be laughter. Even the way she touched me changed. It wasn't anything dramatic, but there was a distance I couldn't ignore, even if I tried. I told myself it was all in my head, that I was just overthinking things. Maybe she was stressed. Work could do that to anyone, right? But then came that night, the night that would forever change the way I looked at her, at us. It was a Thursday. I remember that because Thursdays had become Emily's late nights at work. She told me they were preparing for a big client presentation, and I didn't question it. That evening, after putting Ethan to bed, I sat on the couch, flipping through channels, trying to distract myself from the growing pit in my stomach. Something just felt off. I don't know why, but I had this overwhelming urge to see her, to know for sure that everything was okay between us. So I did something I'd never done before. I grabbed my keys, got in the car, and drove to the restaurant where she said the dinner meeting was being held. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I'd find her there with her colleagues, laughing and talking about work. But when I pulled up to the restaurant and looked inside, I didn't see her with the group she had mentioned. In fact, I didn't see her at all. I was about to leave, feeling foolish for even doubting her, when I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, in the far corner of the restaurant, in a secluded booth half hidden by shadows, was Emily. And she wasn't alone. Daniel, her boss, sat across from her, leaning in close. Too close. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched him reach out and place his hand over hers. Emily didn't pull away. She smiled, a smile I hadn't seen in years, soft, warm, intimate. The kind of smile you reserve for someone you care deeply about. Before I could fully process what I was seeing, Daniel leaned in even closer, his hand moving up her arm. Then, without hesitation, he kissed her. I stood there, frozen, as my entire world collapsed in front of me. I should have stormed in, demanded an explanation, confronted them right there. But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by the sight of my wife in the arms of another man. The woman I had loved, the mother of my child, was betraying me in the most intimate way possible. I don't remember how long I stood there, but when I finally tore myself away, I felt numb, empty, like everything I thought I knew had been a lie. I drove home in silence, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts but no clear answers. What was I supposed to do now? Confront her? Leave her? Was this a one-time thing, or had it been going on for months, maybe years? That night, Emily came home late, just as she said she would. She walked in, kissed me on the cheek, and headed upstairs to bed, completely unaware that I knew. I watched her, my heart pounding, as she disappeared down the hall. The urge to confront her right then and there was overwhelming, but I held back. I needed time to think. I needed a plan. What do you do when the life you've built is shattered in a single moment? How do you face the person you thought you knew better than anyone, knowing they've been lying to you? I had no answers. All I knew was that everything was about to change. The days that followed were a blur. I went through the motions of normal life, but inside, I was spiraling. Every time I looked at Emily, I saw her with Daniel in that corner booth, laughing and smiling like she had nothing to hide. The guilt weighed heavily on me, knowing that I was pretending everything was fine when it was far from it. Ethan, our son, was the only thing keeping me grounded. I couldn't let him see the cracks forming in our family. I kept telling myself I needed to figure this out, needed to be smart about how I handled it. I didn't want to destroy everything in a fit of rage, as tempting as it was to confront her right then and there. But the silence, the pretending, it was eating me alive. It was Saturday morning when I finally broke. Ethan was at a friend's house for the day, and the house was unusually quiet. Emily was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I walked in, trying to keep my emotions in check, but the words were burning inside my chest. "Emily," I said, my voice harsher than I intended, "we need to talk." She looked up, confused. About what? I could feel my hands clenching into fists, the anger boiling over. "I know. About you and Daniel. I know what's going on." Her face went pale. She stared at me, wide-eyed, like a deer caught in headlights. "What are you talking about?" I slammed my fist on the table, unable to hold it in any longer. "Don't play dumb, Emily. I saw you. I saw you with him at the restaurant the other night. I saw everything." For a moment, there was nothing but silence between us. She sat there, frozen, as the reality of the situation hit her. Then, slowly, her eyes filled with tears. "Mike, please," she started, but I cut her off. "How long has this been going on?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. "How long have you been lying to me?" She looked down at the table, tears now streaming down her face. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she whispered. "How long?" I repeated, my voice lower but filled with more fury than before. "A few months," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I never meant for it to go this far. It just happened." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A few months? My wife, the woman I had loved for more than a decade, had been betraying me for months. I felt like I was going to be sick. "Why?" I asked, my voice cracking as the rage began to subside, replaced by a hollow emptiness. "Why, Emily? Was I not enough for you? Was our family not enough?" She wiped her tears, but they kept coming. "It wasn't about you," she said quietly. "I love you, Mike. I love our family. But things changed. We changed. I felt like I wasn't enough for you anymore. Like I was just fading away. And then Daniel. He paid attention to me, and I got lost in it. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I scoffed, incredulous. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or burning dinner. What you did was a choice you made over and over again." I stood there, feeling like my world had collapsed. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I trusted with my life, was sitting across from me, confessing to an affair, and it didn't feel real. I had expected anger, maybe even violence, but instead, I felt numb. Completely and utterly numb. "I can't do this," I finally said, backing away from the table. I can't even look at you right now. Mike, please, she cried, standing up and reaching out for me. Please, we can fix this. I swear, it's over. I'll quit my job. I'll do anything to make this right. Just don't leave me. Don't leave us. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of betrayal clouding my thoughts. I need time to think, I said, my voice distant, even to myself. I don't know what to do, but I can't just pretend like this didn't happen. I need to figure out how to move forward. Emily collapsed back into her chair, sobbing into her hands, but I didn't stay to comfort her. I grabbed my keys and left the house, needing air, needing space, needing to get away from the suffocating weight of the truth. I spent the next few hours driving aimlessly, my mind spinning with thoughts I couldn't control. How could she have done this to me? To us? What was I supposed to do now? Was our marriage over? Was this the end of the life we had built together? I found myself parked at the edge of a cliff overlooking the city, the sun setting in the distance, casting long shadows across the landscape. The silence of the moment was deafening. I had never felt so alone. I pulled out my phone and stared at it. Should I call someone? Who could I even talk to about this? I hadn't told anyone yet, not even my closest friends. I didn't want to admit to the world that my marriage was falling apart, that the woman I loved had betrayed me. But there was one person I knew I could talk to, someone who would understand. My brother, Jake. Jake and I had always been close. He was the wild one, the risk taker, while I had always been the more responsible one, the one who played it safe. But when things got tough, Jake was always there for me, no matter what. He had gone through his own share of heartbreaks, and I knew he wouldn't judge me for what was happening now. I dialed his number, my hands shaking as I held the phone to my ear. After a few rings, he picked up. Mike? What's up, man? His voice was casual, but I could hear the concern creeping in as soon as he realized I wasn't my usual self. Jake. I hesitated, not knowing how to even begin. It's Emily. She's been having an affair. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear Jake's breath catch as he processed what I had just said. Jesus, Mike, he finally said, his voice low and serious. I'm so sorry, man. Are you okay? I don't know, I admitted. I don't know what to do. She's been seeing her boss for months. Months, Jake. And I just found out. He didn't say anything for a while, letting the weight of the moment sink in. Then, finally, he spoke again. You want me to come over? He asked, his voice steady. We can figure this out together. I don't know, I said again, feeling lost. I don't even know if there's anything left to figure out. Jake paused, then spoke with the kind of firmness that only a brother could. Listen, whatever you decide, just know you don't have to go through this alone. I'm here for you, man. Whatever you need. After I hung up the phone with Jake, I just sat there, staring at the city lights flickering in the distance. My mind was still a chaotic mess, but his words echoed in my head, whatever you decide. I couldn't shake the feeling that, no matter what I did, nothing would ever be the same. Emily's affair had already changed everything. How was I supposed to move forward knowing that the person I trusted most had been lying to me for months? Every memory we shared felt tainted now. But Jake was right about one thing. I didn't have to make any decisions tonight. I needed time. Time to breathe. Time to figure out what I was going to do about my marriage, about Ethan, about everything. Eventually, the cool evening air began to bite, and I realized I couldn't stay out there forever. As much as I didn't want to face Emily again, I had to go home. Ethan would be back soon, and I needed to be there for him. No matter what was happening between me and Emily, Ethan couldn't see his parents falling apart. He didn't deserve to get caught in the crossfire of our problems. When I pulled into the driveway, I could see the lights on in the living room. Emily was waiting for me. My stomach twisted at the thought of another confrontation, but I steeled myself. I couldn't avoid her forever. As soon as I walked through the door, Emily stood up from the couch, her eyes red from crying. She looked like she wanted to speak, to plead with me, but I couldn't deal with it right now. Mike, she started, her voice shaky. Not now, Emily, I said, cutting her off as I hung my coat by the door. Ethan's coming home soon. We need to hold it together for him. We'll talk later. I could see the hurt in her eyes, but I didn't care. Not right now. I wasn't ready for more of her apologies or explanations. I needed space. She nodded silently and sat back down, clearly respecting the boundary I was trying to put between us. The next few days were a struggle. Emily and I existed in this strange limbo where we spoke only when necessary, and everything we did was for Ethan's benefit. Every word, every interaction felt forced and awkward, like we were actors playing roles in a play we didn't want to be in anymore. I kept telling myself I was doing this for Ethan, that I needed time to think, to process everything. But the truth was, I was afraid. Afraid of making the wrong decision. Afraid of ripping our family apart and regretting it later. And yet, every time I looked at Emily, I couldn't shake the image of her with Daniel. The betrayal gnawed at me constantly, keeping me up at night, fueling my anger and confusion. Jake called me a couple of times to check in, but I didn't have much to say. I didn't have any answers yet. I was stuck, paralyzed by the weight of the decision I knew I had to make. Stay and try to rebuild, or leave and start over. Both options felt equally impossible. And then there was the nagging thought at the back of my mind. What if this wasn't just a mistake? What if Emily didn't really love me anymore? What if she was staying out of guilt, or for Ethan's sake, but her heart was still with Daniel? The thought made me sick, but I couldn't stop wondering. I needed to know the truth, whatever it was. It was a week after I first confronted Emily when I finally asked her the question that had been haunting me. Ethan was at a sleepover, so it was just the two of us in the house. We were sitting in the kitchen, the silence between us thick and oppressive. I couldn't take it anymore. Why, Emily? I asked quietly, staring down at the coffee cup in front of me. Why did you do it? Was it something I did or didn't do? She looked at me, her eyes wide and glassy, but she didn't answer right away. I could see the gears turning in her mind, trying to find the right words. I don't know, she said eventually, her voice barely a whisper. It wasn't about you, Mike. It wasn't that you weren't enough, or that I didn't love you. I did. I still do. Her words stung, but I needed more. Then why? If you loved me, why did you do it? She let out a shaky breath and wiped at the tears forming in her eyes. I felt lost, like I wasn't myself anymore. I wasn't Emily, the woman I used to be. I was just your wife, Ethan's mom. And I love you both, I do. But I felt like I was fading, like I wasn't important anymore. Her words hung in the air between us, and for the first time since I caught her, I could see the depth of her pain. But it didn't make the betrayal any easier to swallow. And Daniel? I asked, my voice low. What about him? Was he just, what? A way to feel important again? She nodded, tears now streaming down her face. It started so innocently, Mike. I swear it did. I wasn't looking for anything. It just happened. He made me feel seen again, like I mattered. But it was a mistake. The biggest mistake I've ever made, and I regret it every single day. I sat there, absorbing her words. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to tell her how selfish she'd been, how much she'd hurt me. But another part of me, an unexpected, quiet part, felt something else. Understanding. I hated it, but there it was. I had been so focused on building my business, on providing for our family, that maybe I had stopped seeing her too. Maybe I hadn't noticed how disconnected she'd become because I was too busy to look. But that didn't excuse what she did. Nothing ever would. So what now? I asked, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. What do we do? She wiped her eyes and looked at me with a mix of desperation and hope. I don't know, Mike, but I want to try. I want to fix this, if you'll let me. I know it won't be easy, and I know you may never trust me again, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Please, just give me a chance. Emily's words echoed in my mind long after she went to bed that night. Could we fix this? Could I ever truly forgive her for what she had done? And even if I could, would I ever be able to look at her the same way again? The question swirled around in my head, refusing to give me peace. The truth was, I didn't know if I could, but I owed it to myself and to Ethan to try. I wasn't ready to walk away from everything we'd built together, not without giving it one last shot. The next morning, I woke up before Emily and found her in the kitchen, making coffee. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept much either. For a moment, I just watched her, remembering the woman I fell in love with all those years ago. "Emily," I said quietly, and she turned to look at me, her face filled with uncertainty. "I'm not saying I forgive you. I don't know if I ever can, but I'm willing to try." She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Really?" she whispered. I nodded, feeling the weight of my decision settling on my shoulders. "For Ethan. For us. But this is going to take time. A lot of time." Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. "I understand. Thank you, Mike. Thank you for giving us a chance." And just like that, we stood at the edge of an uncertain future. Whether we would make it through or not was still a mystery, but for now, we were taking the first step, together. In the weeks that followed, Emily and I tried to pick up the pieces of what was left of our marriage. It was slow, awkward, and at times unbearable. The ghost of her betrayal hung over us like a dark cloud, suffocating every attempt at normalcy. Each day was a reminder of what had happened, of the trust that had been shattered. We were moving forward, but every step felt like walking through quicksand. The hardest part wasn't the silence or even the tension between us. It was the pretending. Pretending for Ethan. Pretending that everything was okay when, in reality, we were teetering on the edge of collapse. Ethan was too young to fully understand what was going on, but kids are smarter than we give them credit for. He could feel the distance between us, the forced smiles, the tension that lingered in the house. For the first time, I felt like I was lying to him. I told myself I was doing it to protect him, but deep down I wondered if I was just avoiding the inevitable. Was this how things would be from now on? Two people trying to coexist for the sake of their child, while resentment simmered just below the surface. Emily was trying. I could see that. She quit her job at the firm within a week of our conversation. It wasn't a condition I had set, but she did it anyway, wanting to prove that she was committed to making things right. She started seeing a therapist, something she insisted on doing before we even thought about couples counseling. "I need to fix myself before I can fix us," she had said, and I agreed. If there was any hope for us at all, it would only come if she was truly willing to change. But even with all her efforts, there were days when I could barely look at her. The anger, the pain, it was still there, lurking beneath the surface, ready to erupt at any moment. Every time she tried to touch me, every time she said she loved me, I felt a sharp stab of betrayal. How could she say those words when she had been so willing to throw everything away? When she had chosen someone else over me? I couldn't forget. I couldn't let go. And I wasn't sure if I ever would. One evening, after weeks of barely touching each other, Emily approached me cautiously in the kitchen while I was making dinner. Ethan was upstairs doing homework, and the house was quiet. Too quiet. "Mike," she said softly, almost as if she was afraid to speak. "Can we talk?" I looked up from the stove, my hands gripping the wooden spoon tightly. I wasn't in the mood for another conversation, but I nodded. "What's on your mind?" She took a deep breath, clearly nervous, and stepped closer. "I've been seeing Dr. Harris for a few weeks now, and it's been hard, but good. I've realized a lot about myself, about why I did what I did, and I want to share that with you. I want us to start therapy together, if you're ready." I turned back to the stove, stirring the pot of pasta in front of me. The thought of sitting in a room with a stranger, airing out our dirty laundry, wasn't appealing, but I knew it was necessary if we had any chance of moving forward. "I'm not sure if I'm ready for that," I admitted, my voice low. "There's still so much anger inside me, Em. I don't know how to let it go. I don't even know where to start." She nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "I get that. I do. But I'm willing to wait. Whenever you're ready, I'll be here." There was a long pause between us, the only sound in the room the bubbling of the pasta on the stove. Then, without really thinking, I said, "Okay, let's try. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, but I'll try." Emily's face softened with relief, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes. It wasn't much, but it was something, a step in the right direction. The first few therapy sessions were brutal. Sitting across from Emily in that small, sterile room, with Dr. Harris watching us like a referee, I felt exposed, vulnerable. I wasn't used to talking about my feelings, and having to relive the pain of her affair in such detail was agonizing. Every time I spoke about the betrayal, it felt like reopening a wound that hadn't even begun to heal. But Dr. Harris was patient, and so was Emily. We started with small things: how our communication had broken down long before the affair, how we had both stopped making the effort to connect. It was hard to admit that I had played a role in the distance that had grown between us, but it was the truth. I had thrown myself into my work, into providing for our family, and I hadn't noticed that Emily was slipping away from me. Emily, for her part, owned up to everything. She didn't make excuses, didn't try to shift the blame. She admitted that she had made a terrible mistake, that she had allowed herself to get lost in the attention Daniel had given her. "It wasn't about love," she said in one session, her voice thick with emotion. "It was about feeling like I mattered, like someone noticed me." Her words hit me hard. I realized that I had taken her for granted in so many ways. I had assumed she was happy because we had a good life, because we were raising a wonderful son. But I hadn't really seen her, not in the way she needed to be seen. The more we talked, the more I began to understand where things had gone wrong. It didn't excuse what she had done, nothing ever would, but it helped me see that our marriage had been broken long before the affair. We had both let it happen. As the months went by, therapy began to help. We were still far from where we needed to be, but we were talking more. We were being honest with each other, even when it was painful. The anger I had been holding onto started to soften, just a little, and I found myself thinking about the future in a different way. One night, after Ethan had gone to bed, Emily and I sat on the couch together, something we hadn't done in months. We didn't speak at first. We didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't filled with tension anymore. It was peaceful. Then, out of nowhere, Emily reached over and took my hand. For a moment, I stiffened, unsure of how to react. But then I relaxed. Her touch, once a reminder of everything that had gone wrong, felt different now. It felt like the first step towards something new, something better. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking the quiet. "For everything." I looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the sharp sting of betrayal. It was still there, somewhere deep inside, but it wasn't all-consuming anymore. I squeezed her hand gently, not knowing what else to say. Maybe there wasn't anything else to say. We weren't fixed, not by a long shot, but we were moving forward, and for the first time in months, I felt like that was enough. The journey to rebuild our marriage was far from over, but we were making progress. We had a long way to go, and there were still days when the weight of what had happened felt unbearable. But we were trying. For ourselves. For Ethan. Trust was the hardest thing to regain. I still questioned her sometimes, still found myself wondering if she was telling the truth about little things. It would take time, maybe a lot of time, before that wound would fully heal. But every day, we were learning to forgive, both each other and ourselves. And that, more than anything, gave me hope. Weeks turned into months, and though Emily and I were making progress, there were still moments when the past came rushing back with a force that took my breath away. The therapy sessions helped, and we were talking more than we had in years. But despite the progress, one thing lingered in the back of my mind: trust. Rebuilding trust is like trying to glue together shattered glass. No matter how careful you are, the cracks are always there, visible reminders of what's been broken. And some days, those cracks were all I could see. One Saturday afternoon, as we were preparing lunch, Emily's phone buzzed on the counter. It was nothing unusual. Her phone was always going off with notifications from friends or family. But today, something in me snapped. I didn't mean to, but my eyes shot to the screen, and before I knew it, I was picking up her phone. Emily, who had been chopping vegetables, stopped and looked at me, the tension between us immediate. "Mike," she started, her voice cautious. I knew it wasn't fair. I had no reason to believe she was doing anything wrong. But the betrayal was still fresh enough that even the smallest flicker of suspicion could set me off. I thumbed the screen to unlock it, but she hadn't left her phone open, and the message remained hidden behind her lock screen. I placed it back on the counter, trying to swallow my emotions. "I'm sorry," I muttered, turning away from her. Emily let out a long, heavy sigh. It's okay, she said, putting down the knife and walking over to me. I get it. I shook my head, feeling the weight of guilt creeping in. No, it's not okay. I shouldn't be doing that. I'm trying, I really am. But my voice trailed off as I struggled to find the words. Emily touched my arm gently, her voice soft. I know, and I know this isn't going to be easy, but I'm not hiding anything, Mike. I swear. I don't want you to feel like this. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I really believed her. I wanted to. God, I wanted to so badly. But something inside me was still broken, and I didn't know if it could ever be fully fixed. We stood there in the kitchen for a long time, neither of us saying anything, just letting the silence stretch between us. Emily's hand was still on my arm, her fingers brushing my skin, and for a moment, I let myself relax into the contact. We're going to be okay, she said quietly. We just need time. But time didn't seem to be the cure I hoped it would be. The progress we had made was fragile, and every small misstep seemed to set us back. I knew that rebuilding trust required patience, but I hadn't anticipated how exhausting it would be to constantly question every word, every action. A few weeks later, I came home from work earlier than usual. Emily hadn't expected me, and when I walked into the house, I heard her on the phone. Her voice was low, and while it wasn't suspicious in itself, something about the way she was speaking made my gut twist. I stood in the hallway, listening, my heart racing. No, it's not a good time right now, she said quietly. I can't talk about this. I took a step closer, trying to make out the conversation. Was it one of her friends? A family member? Or was it someone else? As I rounded the corner, Emily looked up and saw me. Her eyes widened, and she quickly ended the call, slipping her phone into her pocket. Who was that? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She hesitated for a second, just long enough for my suspicions to flare up again. It was just Sarah, she said, her tone casual, though her body language was anything but. Sarah? I repeated, feeling the weight of doubt press down on me. Then why did you hang up so fast? She shook her head, visibly frustrated. Mike, I wasn't hiding anything. It's just, you've been on edge lately, and I didn't want to upset you over something stupid. Sarah's going through some stuff, and I didn't want to get into it. I stared at her, trying to read between the lines. You sure that's all it was? Emily's eyes hardened. Yes, Mike, that's all it was. You can call her yourself if you don't believe me. I didn't take her up on the offer. I knew I was being unreasonable, but the doubt had already crept in, and once it was there, it was hard to shake. I nodded stiffly and walked past her into the living room, needing some space to calm down. A few days later, the test I had been dreading came crashing into our lives. It was late in the evening when Emily's phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a simple notification. She picked it up, glanced at the screen, and her face paled. She quickly turned the phone face down on the table. What is it? I asked, my heart immediately racing. Nothing, she said too quickly, her voice shaky. I grabbed the phone before she could stop me and turned it over. It was a text message from Daniel. We need to talk. Everything inside me froze. My mind screamed at me to throw the phone, to confront her, to demand an explanation. But instead, I stood there, staring at the words on the screen as a cold wave of dread washed over me. Why is he texting you? I asked, my voice low, controlled. Emily took a step toward me, her hands raised defensively. Mike, I swear I haven't talked to him in months. I don't know why he's reaching out now. I blocked him after everything. Then why is he texting you now? I snapped, the anger bubbling up inside me. If you blocked him, why is he trying to contact you? I don't know, she cried, tears welling up in her eyes. I'm telling you the truth. I haven't spoken to him. I don't want anything to do with him. Please, Mike, you have to believe me. But the sight of Daniel's name on her phone was too much. It was like a punch to the gut, reopening every wound I had worked so hard to heal. I need to think, I muttered, dropping the phone back onto the table and walking out of the room. I could hear Emily sobbing behind me, but I couldn't stop. I needed air. I needed to get away. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, my thoughts swirling in a chaotic storm of anger, betrayal, and doubt. The text from Daniel had pushed me to the breaking point. I had been trying so hard to move forward, to forgive, but this felt like the universe's cruel joke. Was this ever going to end? Would I ever be able to trust her again? I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. I wanted to scream, to hit something, to release all the pent-up frustration that had been building inside me for months. But instead, I just sat there, staring out at the darkened road in front of me, feeling utterly lost. I thought about Ethan. What would this do to him if I left? What would he think of me if I couldn't make this work? I had promised myself that I would try, that I would fight for my family. But how could I fight when everything felt so hopeless? The image of Daniel's text flashed in my mind again, and I felt the familiar wave of anger rise inside me. But underneath it, there was something else. Something quieter. Fear. What if Emily really had moved on from Daniel? What if this was just a test, a moment where I had to choose whether or not to trust her? Was I ready to throw everything away because of one text message? I drove back home, feeling more uncertain than ever. When I walked through the door, Emily was sitting on the couch, her face buried in her hands. She looked up when she heard me, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Mike," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't do anything. You have to believe me. Please." I stood there, staring at her, the weight of everything pressing down on me. This was the moment where I had to decide whether to continue fighting for us or to let go. The choice was mine, and for the first time, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I stood there, staring at Emily, my mind racing. Her tear-streaked face pleaded with me, but I wasn't ready to speak. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything that had happened and everything unsaid. The text from Daniel had brought me to a crossroads, one that I had been dreading, but knew was coming. I couldn't stay in this limbo any longer. I needed answers. I needed clarity. I grabbed my phone from the counter and turned back toward Emily. "I'm calling him," I said, my voice steady, despite the storm raging inside me. Her eyes widened in shock. "Mike? No. Please, you don't need to do that. I told you, I haven't talked to him in months." But I couldn't take her word for it. Not anymore. "I need to hear it from him, Emily. If there's any chance of us moving forward, I need to know what's really going on." Before she could protest further, I scrolled through her phone, found Daniel's number, and pressed call. The line rang twice before he answered. "Emily?" Daniel's voice came through the speaker, smooth and confident, like nothing had ever happened. "I wasn't sure you'd." "It's Mike," I interrupted, my voice low and controlled. "Why are you contacting my wife?" There was a long, tense pause. I could feel Emily's eyes on me, but I couldn't look at her. All I could focus on was the voice on the other end of the line. "I figured this might happen," Daniel finally said, his tone hardening. "Mike, this isn't what you think." "I don't care what you think it is," I snapped. "You don't have any right to contact her. Whatever happened between you two is over. Done." "So, again, why are you texting her?" Daniel's silence told me more than I needed to know. I could hear him breathing on the other end, stalling for time. I just wanted to talk to her, to explain everything that happened. I felt like things ended without a proper conversation. I clenched my fist so tightly around the phone that my knuckles turned white. "You don't get to have any conversations with her. She doesn't owe you an explanation. This is my family, Daniel. Stay away from us. Do you understand?" Before he could respond, I hung up the phone, the adrenaline coursing through me like wildfire. I tossed Emily's phone back onto the counter and stared at her, my chest heaving. "That's it," I said. "He's out of our lives for good. But you have to tell me, Emily. Did you want to talk to him? Were you going to call him back?" Emily's lips trembled as she tried to hold back her tears. "No," she whispered. "I swear, Mike, I didn't want to talk to him. When I saw the message, I felt sick. I was terrified that you'd think I wanted to go back to him. But I don't. I don't, Mike. He means nothing to me." I stood there, weighing her words. There was no doubt that Daniel had been trying to insert himself back into our lives. But was it possible that Emily really had cut him off completely? Could I trust her? After everything we had been through, trust felt like a distant memory. I want to believe you, Emily, I said slowly, but I need more than just words. You have to prove to me that you're done with him, that we can move forward from this. Emily nodded quickly, wiping her eyes. I will. I'll do anything, Mike. I'll block him again, change my number if I have to. I'll never let him into our lives again. I promise. The days after the confrontation with Daniel were tense but revealing. Emily did everything she could to assure me that she was serious about rebuilding our marriage. She blocked Daniel from her phone again, and when she saw that wasn't enough for me, she changed her number altogether. I knew these actions weren't magic solutions. They didn't instantly erase the doubts that lingered in my mind, but they were steps, concrete steps, toward healing. The following weekend, Emily suggested something that I hadn't expected. Let's take a trip, she said one morning while we were sitting at the breakfast table. Just the two of us. Maybe a weekend away. Somewhere we can disconnect from everything and just be us again. The idea felt foreign at first. After all, the last few months had been anything but romantic. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much we needed it. I needed it. I needed to know if there was still something worth fighting for between us. What about Ethan? I asked, though I could already feel myself warming to the idea. We can ask your mom to watch him for a couple of days. She's always asking to spend more time with him anyway. I nodded slowly. Okay, let's do it. Emily smiled for the first time in days, and though it was small, it lit something up inside me. A spark. I wasn't sure if it was hope, but it was something, and that was more than I'd felt in a long time. The weekend came quickly. We decided on a quiet little cabin a few hours outside the city, far away from the noise of daily life and the reminders of everything we had been through. As we drove up into the mountains, the tension that had been building inside me started to loosen. The change of scenery, the crisp mountain air, it felt like a fresh start. When we arrived, the cabin was even more isolated than I had imagined. It was nestled deep in the woods, surrounded by tall pines, with no cell service or internet connection, just the two of us. The first night was quiet. We cooked dinner together, the silence between us comfortable for the first time in months. Afterward, we sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the stars. This is nice, Emily said softly, her voice barely louder than the wind rustling through the trees. Yeah, it is, I agreed, though my mind was still racing with the thoughts of everything that had led us here. But sitting next to her, the warmth of her body against mine, I allowed myself to remember the good times, the laughter, the love, the partnership we had shared before everything went wrong. As the night deepened, we moved back inside, lighting a fire in the small fireplace. We sat on the floor in front of it, and for a moment, it felt like old times, like the beginning, when everything had been simple. Mike, Emily said, her voice breaking the silence, I know I've said it before, but I'm so sorry for everything, for hurting you the way I did. I don't know how I'll ever make it right, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying. I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman I had married was still there, beneath the pain and mistakes. And in that moment, I realized something. I didn't want to give up on us. Not yet. Not when there was still something left to save. I'm not saying it's all okay, I said slowly, and I don't know how long it'll take for me to fully trust you again, but I'm here. I'm willing to try. For us. For Ethan. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she reached for my hand. That's all I've wanted. A chance. And there, in front of the fire, we sat in silence, holding on to each other like we hadn't in months. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't a miracle fix, but it was a beginning. A real one. We returned from the trip with a renewed sense of purpose. The wounds were still there, but we had started the long process of healing. Things didn't magically go back to the way they were, but I stopped feeling like we were walking on a tightrope, ready to fall at any moment. We talked more. We spent time together without the lingering awkwardness that had haunted us for so long. And slowly, day by day, the trust began to rebuild. It wasn't linear, and there were still bad days. But there were also good days. Days when I looked at Emily and saw the woman I fell in love with, not the woman who had hurt me. We didn't tell Ethan much. He was still too young to fully understand what had happened, but he noticed that we were closer, that we were happier. And that, more than anything, told me we were doing the right thing. Our marriage wasn't perfect. It probably never would be. But it was ours, and we were choosing to fight for it. Together.